Right, so we're super excited to have Brian today showing off his demo. He joined us 2 weeks ago. Welcome again, Brian, and thank you so much for sharing with us. So take it away.
Okay, so my project is a regex to peg parser. Let me share my screen here. We'll just sort of introduce the concept, I guess, to begin with. So if you haven't heard of parsing expression grammars, they're unambiguous grammar, kind of a successor to EBNF, where they're better for use with computers because they're always unambiguous and they make certain guarantees. So it's based on this paper published in 2004 by Brian Ford, and it's pretty similar if you are familiar with like other grammars. It's pretty similar, but there are some key differences. One of the big differences is prioritized choice. So this is one of the key things that guarantees the unambiguity, which makes the grammar easier to reason about, easier to implement. And I think it makes it easier to read ultimately once you get used to it. So then there was another paper more recently, 2009, which um, gave an algorithm for converting regexes to parsing expression grammars. Because what people, this wasn't the original idea with pegs, but what people like me who use them realized is that they are a great replacement for regexes. Almost everywhere we're using regexes, you could replace it and you kind of get some benefits. I mean, obviously there's lots of regex tooling, there's not so much peg tooling, but as soon as a regex gets complicated, it's worth it actually. So let me show my application now here. So this converter is you type in your regex here, and it converts it to a parsing expression grammar. And this is using the ECMAScript regex engine, so JavaScript. I sort of explain the concepts here, and then here's some examples. So just showing the different language constructs that have been implemented. That's a dependent match, the simplest version. This is the unordered choice being converted to ordered choice, which is one of the more complicated parts. So I'll just type these in to sort of show how it works. Type it in, hit enter, and it converts your parsing expression grammar. And then once you get more complicated, if you're doing something complicated, then you can start pulling out. The idea with these pegs is that you start pulling out segments and put them into a new rule, like you would if you were defining an EBNF grammar. So you could take this out, give it a new name, like the SDF match, and put it in a new rule. And so instead of your regex just growing a long line, your pegs grow down. And the pegs are awesome for parsing nested structures, something that your regexes completely fail at. So for example, if you write your own XML parser, I mean, no hassle at all, really easy. So down here, I've got these different examples. Let me just go through them. So here's 0 or to infinity, 1 to infinity. And you can group stuff like this. This is one of the more complicated examples. You've got grouping, you've got 0 or 1 repetition, and character classes. So, and then here I have a little guide to the peg syntax. So this is the key one that is sort of unusual because the semantics of this ends up working out differently, the unordered choice operator. So the best example is this one here, where in a regex, this regex will match ABC, but you can see that the peg is different. The peg, you have to distribute the C into the unordered, into the choice grouping like this. So it's got to be AC or ABC. So this is one of the key differences between regex and peg. And yeah, that's about it. Here's the code. And I deployed this. I wrote it in JavaScript, and well, I wrote it a first version in Erlang, but the AST wasn't useful enough. So I used the JavaScript Regex AST library that Song found, and then I was rewrote it in JavaScript and put it on the web here. Any questions?
Lots.
Hey, well, I have a question. I'm just really curious, like, why did you pick this project to work on?
It's just my personal interest. So, because yeah, I read the PEG paper a long time ago, and then at some point I had a long regex that I was using to basically it was for a parsing task, but it kind of snuck up on me. It was a Vim script I was using to do some Vim, like editing a file to transform it into another file format. And I kept adding new rules to this regex over time, and I was using this like for a few months or something. And I realized eventually I had like 10 regex rules with all these transformations. It was a total nightmare, and it was unmaintainable. And then I thought back to like I should be using a parser generator for this. And then I remembered we have pegs, and so I reached for the first. I tried out the classic parser generators like Bison and Yak and all that, and then I tried out pegs, and I was amazed. Like pegs are way easier. They're simpler to use. They're easier to read. And then after I rewrote my thing into peg, which was surprisingly easy, I was able to maintain it. It was very readable, very maintainable. So ever since then, I've been a bit of a minor peg advocate, and I think like it would be really nice for developers to have the kind of, with Regex now we have these nice websites that show you how to use Regexes and all the detail and help you to debug them. And I think it would be nice to have some tools like that for pegs, which might help with adoption, might show people. It's not that there's much more to learn, it's just a little bit more to learn. And it's really nice to use. So anyway, I just kind of want to spread that concept. And I have a bunch of things I'd like to add to my website there. And I think I will keep adding to it now that I got it started.
Yeah, like Regex is such a nightmare. I mean, it's just like one of the necessary evils that every developer have to deal with. And I always struggle with it. So yeah, it's just really like I'm curious, like how do you like what does it take for you to take the project from where it is to a place where it can really help all engineers to make their life easier when using Regex?
Yeah, I think that's I think there's two things. One, I would actually focus on cleaning up the UX more. So making it really nice, like you have like Regex texture websites where you highlight over and it shows you what it's doing and stuff. And then I would show the additional step that you have with pegs, which Regexes don't even help you with really, which is the transformation step. So after you've parsed you've written your peg to parse it, then you want to transform, and but also you want to keep it, you want to separate it out into rules. So that part is a little bit human, like that's not usually a machine thing. But I want to have I have an idea for a little, basically a UI that would show people like, as you add complexity to your peg, like this is what you do. You take certain expressions, you move them into new rules, and then show how that is just really maintainable. So I think it's not too hard to do. Like I think I did the hardest part, which was the algorithm to convert, in particular, the choice operator into unordered choice operator. And then there's a bunch of other details as well there. And now I think it's kind of like a UX task, like a teaching task. So I think if I could make it a little bit more accessible to people, like you don't have to go read that whole paper, which is what I think still where we are at. Like you can read that paper. Then I think some brave people might adopt it and might have the kind of delight that I had when I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm glad you're thinking that way, because if you make it easily accessible for engineers, and then I would suggest you go finish that, and then you have like 70 adopters that commit right away.
I don't know, Bear. I seem to remember that whenever you had a problem with hard regexes, you would just ask me to do it.
Yes, that's my Ask Bill channel. Hey, it's getting out of control, Bill. Can you take a look?
Also,
Yeah,
I
I think that
didn't
could
see
be a really
this.
cool resource, Brian.
I also didn't exactly see this coming, but I think that this is the first like public open source reference implementation of a regex to peg converter, the implementation of the algorithm in that paper. So that's kind of cool.
Super
There
cool.
might be something out there, but I couldn't find anything.
So Brian, how would a software engineer make use of this? Like, is it something that they're writing in a regex and then they go and use your converter and it's sort of a one-time shot, or is there like, and then as they use it more and more, they develop an affinity and understanding of peg, and then they employ that? Or is it could this be like is it a library that you could drop in and into your project and like have it do? I don't know. I'm trying to imagine like how to accelerate the adoption of peg.
I think a library might defeat the purpose, because then you've still got a regex in your code when the
Right.
goal is to try to remove the regexes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my code specifically is more of a teaching tool or to help adoption. Every language already has peg libraries. Some of them are a bit immature, but some of them are really nice. So you can adopt pegs immediately in your language of choice. And I think the barrier is just learning how they work. Because yeah, there's a bit of a learning curve to get your head around specifically the unordered choice operator, because it just doesn't work quite as you expect. But once you realize that, it's actually much simpler. It's a much simpler concept than regex. So with this, one of the major applications of this tool, I think, which still wouldn't be a library, but it would be like someone comes to the site. Like what I'd like to do is have it so that you can, those huge regexes, like there's a giant PCRE reference regex for email, which is like 1,000 characters long. They don't even have one in JavaScript. It's only in Perl. And my like holy grail would be you take that and you put that into this converter, and then I'll have like that feature that helps you pull out pieces. And you take that inscrutable regex, completely unreadable, and you make it into something actually readable. So you converted existing known good regex for like parsing like truly valid emails, not just like simple emails, but like actually according to the spec. And you could do this with lots of other specs. So for tools that already exist, like for regexes that are already out there and known, you could convert them to pegs and now they're maintainable. Like you convert it to programmatically correct peg and then have a refactoring tool that breaks out into rules. And now you have a known good peg, but you can actually read this and understand what it means and you can edit it. So
Okay.
that's kind of where
that tells me like that a good next step is a video tutorial by you on how complex regex can become and why peg is so much more maintainable and better, and like complementing the library or the open source code that you have and the tool, and then we help you spread the word about peg and start converting people over to a better way.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Thank you for your demo.
And they are more powerful, right? Like it's a grammar. So I guess you can do cooler stuff like parsing nested parentheses, that sort of stuff that you can't really do
Exactly.
like HTML or XML.
Exactly. Yeah. It's XML, HTML is just cake, just so easy with a peg and impossible with a regex. It's like a known disaster to try to parse XML with a regex. And because it just doesn't handle nesting at all. So the regex, just taking that and making it a little bit more formal increases the power by a lot. And it also, like regex is full of special case semantics. Like which I had to deal with when I was writing this converter. So for example, the start of line anchor, that's not strictly start of line, it's also new line in a multi-line regex. So they're overloading the start of line anchor. And there's no reason to do that. Like in a peg, it's explicit. Do you want the start of the input or do you want a new line? And I think that's nicer, that's more clear. And I think that these kinds of special cases in regex lead to complication and pain and suffering. Yeah.
You also mentioned that the performance of regex also depends on the implementation, while pegs are kind of, can you like tell me more about that?
Yeah, so regex itself can't guarantee performance. Of course, there are lots of great implementations that are super fast, but then depending on what features they support, it can be very dangerous, like backtracking. And like depending on how much look behind you support, for example. So that's why, so in HTTP multiplexers, they'll try to detect use of look behind and then give you a warning that's unsafe. So with regexes, it's you're relying on the implementation of the regex engine. With the peg, it's built into the grammar. So pegs always give you the same guarantees. It's a linear time complexity guarantee, and the memory usage is always proportional to the nesting depth. So if you know the nesting depth of your likely inputs, you know the performance characteristics, like you know the memory characteristics of your peg. And so it's easy to predict the performance profile. So they are more memory consumption. Like they use more memory than, you know, it's just something to be aware of because it's all using memoization. But there's also other implementations. But anyway, like you've got nice performance guarantees built into the grammar. And so what I like about that is I can use a peg in any language and it's always the same. Like you're not dealing with like regex, it's totally different between one language and another.
And what other disadvantage you see of using pegs? Because most developers kind of know regex, but not really. Like they always have to look it up. But do you see any other disadvantage where they will have to like learn something new or?
So aside from the existence of regex tooling, which, you know, we have all this regex tooling, there's not equivalent tooling for pegs, but pegs will need less tooling to get to the same place. But so aside from that, pegs are more verbose. So you could say, like, I'm sure some developers would say, like, that's too long. I don't like that. I want a really short match with special case, with the special cases regex provides. So there's a few like convenience special cases regex provides. So that's a matter of opinion. I think the verbosity is a feature, not a because it makes it more understandable and readable. And my focus is on having it readable and maintainable rather than as short as possible. So a peg is going to be longer than regex usually, but I think that's good because it's more explicit, and I think for its length, it's actually simpler and easier to read.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like especially in the case of, you know, when you're using it within a programming language and you're writing code that's going to be shared across a team and multiple people need to read it, and readability is useful. But there are also, I think, cases where regex has a leg up already that it's unlikely to lose in the case of things like CLI tooling, where, you know, people are so used to using grep, and just like in that case, the sort of, you know, having something that's really terse, if you're just going to be like typing it out, is probably going to be easier and might be a tough thing to change minds about.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, Tiago and I were talking about that just before this. There's a command line tool to replace grep with peg. And I was thinking about exactly what you're talking about, some of the verbosity. And I think you could probably introduce flags to these command line tools that would reintroduce some of those conveniences, and then still let you use the peg grammar. But yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, the main advantage of regex is already everywhere. So yeah, I think like practically speaking, I would only use it right now when I'm writing a very complex regex in a program, and and I want it to be simpler. For small things, I would use the existing tooling. And for, yeah, and it's a good point on the command line. You need that persons. Any other questions?
Did you run into any problems while developing this? Like any roadblocks?
Yeah, so the main, so I was doing it in Erlang because Erlang does provide an internal representation of the regexes to the developer. So I wanted to use that, but it wasn't a very easy representation to use. So switching to JavaScript, which had a better implementation of a regex parser. I ended up writing my own parser in Erlang, which was also kind of interesting. I think maybe I'll open source that, but it wasn't as practical. So so switching to the JavaScript regex to AST parser, and then working with that was it accelerated me a bit. But it was also my second implementation, so it's always easier the second time.
Cool.
That was the main thing.
And what's your favorite thing about this project? What did you learn, or what's your favorite thing about it?
My favorite thing is that I got to implement this algorithm from this paper, which was pretty fun. Like it was, it was some good work, like good hard thinking, the type of stuff you don't usually get to do in a regular job where you're just sort of slinging APIs and gluing stuff together. So I got to do some, hardcore implementation of a theoretical algorithm in practice, which is nice, which is fun.
Cool. Let's see. Would you do something differently after doing it? I guess you did it twice, so I guess you just implemented the things you were missing. But
no, I think that yeah, I think I have a good approach now. I would do the same thing. There's more features to add, and there's more stuff I want to do. But no, I think yeah, I think this is the right approach. Have a let someone else convert the regex to the AST, and then work with that. I guess I wrote a recursive algorithm, which works fine. I mean, I would like to do some performance profiling on that. I'm kind of curious about that. See where that might run into trouble, where I could maybe modify that algorithm. So I guess that's something I would do in the next iteration anyway. It's not like I would do that differently to begin with.
would it be possible to use that tool to go over some code base and generate the pegs in place? Like say you have a JavaScript file with some regexes in there, and you use your tool to just switch stuff. Would that be possible?
In the case of JavaScript, probably. I mean, yeah, you could go detect go find the JavaScript regex library. I mean, yeah, I mean, in principle, you could do it. I don't know, probably not very advisable, but like you probably wouldn't want to. Like part of the value of pegs is the human readability aspect anyway. So you take a peg and you make it human readable, so you can edit it. You're getting less value when if you're just machine translating it, and then just leaving it there without additional editing. I mean, I guess it depends how much transformations, like the transformation step for JavaScript regexes or for JavaScript pegs, that's probably not easy to, like that would be much more complicated to convert that automatically, I'm saying. Because that's basically at that point you're compiling JavaScript.
And then use a peg to parse JavaScript.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions for Brian? No.
Thank you for building it.
Thanks.
So what's the next step to get this more widely adopted?
So I have a to-do list that I put in the README. I think there's improvements I want to make to the existing state of it. Add more tests, do some refactoring, and then there's probably clean up the docs. And then there's new features, which I think would be cool. So I'd like to, that would be the next step, to work on some of those new features I talked about, like more interactively showing how to use pegs and how they're sort of meant to be used, I think. So I think some interactive tools, I think people would get it pretty quickly, much more quickly than reading the paper, or reading an instruction guide either, for that matter.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think this could be a talk as well. Like, for example, next week there's a Ruby event. Like this is kind of the perfect thing for a short talk, where you just show, oh, Regex sucks, you can use this thing instead. It's much better.
I think next week at the All Hands is a good place to demo it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really good kind of lightning talk type of demo. Yeah.
Awesome.
This can make a lot of engineers' life easier. Like it's always good, and this impact every single engineer. It's not just like DevOps or front end or back end. It's everyone.
For sure. All right. Thank you so much, Brian, for the
Cool.
demo.
Done, Brian.
Demo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for the questions.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.